Carlos Castaneda. Journey to Ixtlan, Introduction Part 1.
On Saturday, May 22nd, 1971, I went to Sonora, Mexico, to see Don Juan Matus, a Yaqui Indian sorcerer with whom I had been associated since 1961. I thought that my visit on that day was going to be in no way different from the scores of times I had gone to see him in the 10 years I had been his apprentice. The events that took place on that day and on the following days, however, were momentous to me. On that occasion my apprenticeship came to an end. This was not an arbitrary withdrawal on my part, but a bona fide termination. I proceeded from the assumption that the key points in learning magic are the states of sensation of unusual reality caused by the use of psychotropic plants. In this respect, Don Juan was an expert in the use of 3 such plants: Datura inoxia, commonly known as Jimson weed, Lophiophyra williamsii, known as peyote, and a hallucinogenic mushroom of the genus psilocybe. My perception of the world through the effects of those psychotropics had been so bizarre and impressive that I was forced to assume that such states were the only avenue to communicating and learning what Don Juan was attempting to teach me. That assumption was erroneous. For the purposes of avoiding any misunderstandings about my work with Don Juan, I would like to clarify the following issues at this point. So far, I have made no attempt whatsoever to place Don Juan in a cultural milieu. The fact that he considers himself to be a Yaqui Indian does not mean that his knowledge of sorcery is known to or practiced by the Yaqui Indians in general. All the conversations that Don Juan and I have had throughout the apprenticeship were conducted in Spanish, and only because of his thorough command of that language was I capable of obtaining complex explanations of his system of beliefs. I have maintained the practice of referring to that system as sorcery, and I have also maintained the practice of referring to Don Juan as a sorcerer, because these were categories he himself used. Since I was capable of writing down most of what was said in the beginning of the apprenticeship, and everything that was said in the later phases of it, I gathered voluminous field notes. In order to render those notes readable and still preserve the dramatic unity of Don Juan's teachings, I have had to edit them, but what I have deleted is, I believe, immaterial to the points I want to raise. In the case of my work with Don Juan, I have limited my efforts solely to viewing him as a sorcerer and to acquiring membership in his knowledge. For the purpose of presenting my argument, I must first explain the basic premise of sorcery as Don Juan presented it to me. He said that for a sorcerer, the world of everyday life is not real, or out there, as we believe it is. For a sorcerer, reality, or the world we all know, is only a description. For the sake of validating this premise, Don Juan concentrated the best of his efforts into leading me to a genuine conviction that what I held in mind as the world at hand was merely a description of the world, a description that had been pounded into me from the moment I was born. He pointed out that everyone who comes into contact with a child is a teacher who incessantly describes the world to him until the moment when the child is capable of perceiving the world as it is described. This moment is of immense significance as it, no more and no less, determines our entire destiny.
We have no memory of that portentous moment, simply because none of us could possibly have had any point of reference to compare it to anything else. From that moment on, however, the child is a member. He knows the description of the world, and his membership becomes full-fledged, I suppose, when he is capable of making all the proper perceptual interpretations which, by conforming to that description, validate it.
For Don Juan, then, the reality of our day-to-day life consists of an endless flow of perceptual interpretations which we, the individuals who share a specific membership, have learned to make in common. The impression of the wholeness of the world picture, composed of sensory interpretations, is due to the fact that these interpretations follow an uninterrupted, continuous flow and are rarely, with negligible exceptions, subjected to doubt. Indeed, we have long been accustomed to the guaranteed unambiguousness of what we consider reality, and it is hardly possible to seriously entertain the fundamental premise of magical knowledge, according to which this reality is merely one of many possible descriptions of the world. Fortunately, in the case of my apprenticeship, Don Juan was not concerned at all with whether or not I could take his proposition seriously, and he proceeded to elucidate his points, in spite of my opposition, my disbelief, and my inability to understand what he was saying. Thus, as a teacher of sorcery, Don Juan endeavored to describe the world to me from the very first time we talked. The meaningful units of this new description so profoundly contradicted the foundations of my familiar reality framework and were so alien to my perception that comprehending each concept within Don Juan's system demanded extraordinary efforts from me. His contention was that he was teaching me how to see as opposed to merely looking, and that stopping the world was the first step to seeing.
The first step towards seeing is the stopping of the world.
All these years, I regarded the stopping of the world as nothing more than a mysterious metaphor devoid of precise meaning. And only recently, towards the end of my apprenticeship, during a conversation seemingly unrelated to the learning process, I unexpectedly realized the depth and significance of this concept. It turned out to be one of the cornerstones underlying the entire teaching.